Hey guys, I'm Dave and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today, we're going to try to hook up some dust collection to my old bandsaw. You might remember 6 or 7 months ago, I got this bandsaw from a friend and rebuilt it and made it usable. It does a pretty good job. The problem is, there's no dust collection. And when I'm making cuts, even simple ones like this, it just makes a mess, let alone when I'm resawing multiple boards. With that said, I want to see if I can rig up some dust collection to cover that opening and the blade, make it a little bit safer, and keep the shop a bit cleaner while I'm working. Let's see if I can pull this one off. I started the build by ripping down some scrap plywood, one piece of 1/2-inch ply and another of 1/4-inch ply. They were both ripped to fit snugly between the trunnions that tilt the bandsaw table. I used some scrap 1/4-inch masonite to make a pattern to get the shape of the underside of the table. I wanted the outer ply to fill as much of the space as possible and came up with this shape. I took that pattern back to my 1/4-inch ply and traced it in place. I cleaned up the lines with my square before cutting it out at the bandsaw. Luckily, I had left this piece long because my first cut was on the wrong side of my layout line. I traced the shape on the other end and cut the notches correctly this time. A quick check to test the fit, and it looks pretty good. I added a piece of tape to the bandsaw to help me locate the few key points on my stock. The 1/2-inch ply needs to sit low enough that it won't interfere with the lower blade guide. I set the ply in place and marked where the bottom of the stock will sit. The next mark is to locate the mounting point of the ply to the bandsaw, and I marked both the saw body and the plywood. I placed the 1/2-inch ply in place, and then I set the outer plywood on top of that to check their alignment. They're both long, but their bottom edges line up on just the right spot. I made one last mark on the plywood so I could locate the bottom of the dust ramp on the bandsaw. I lined up the bottom of the opening on the adapter to the mark I had just made and realized that the line for the mounting knob was too high. I made a new mark a bit lower to ensure that that knob would clear the adapter while I was tightening the dust chute in place. I found the center of the plywood and used my square to draw the center line on the piece. Then I realized that I needed all my layout lines on the 1/4-inch plywood and transferred them off camera. I added glue to the 1/2-inch ply and spread it out evenly for a good bond. Then the 1/4-inch ply was set on top, and I used the fence on my table saw to help align one side. Then I checked the bottom alignment with my fingers. When everything was lined up correctly, I used some 23 gauge pins to hold things together while the glue dried. I made sure to keep the pins high enough where they wouldn't be in the way when I trimmed the bottom to length later. Any excess glue was wiped away, starting with my saw fence. I came back the next day and used a 2.5-inch hole saw in my drill press to make the hole for the adapter. I made sure to set the bit so that the bottom of the hole would line up with that line I'd marked showing the bottom of the dust ramp. I drilled most of the way through, turned the stock over, and drilled from the other face. This prevents blowout, leaving a cleaner hole. And while it might not be necessary for a job like this, it's kind of habit at this point. I swapped out the hole saw for a sanding drum and changed my belt speed from 600 RPM to 2600 RPM and cleaned up the edges of the hole. Again, this may not be necessary, but I want to reduce as much drag as possible, and it only took a minute or two. One more hole, this time the pilot hole for that mounting knob. I used an 1/8-inch brad point bit for now, just so I could locate things on the next step. I set the plywood in place on the bandsaw and used an 1/8-inch twist bit to mark the location for the mounting knob. With the location marked, I came back with a 1/16-inch drill bit and drilled that first hole. This part of the bandsaw is cast aluminum, but it still needs a bit of oil to keep things cool while drilling. And I also set my drill to the low speed, which I always use when drilling any kind of metal. I enlarged the hole in several steps, first with an 1/8 inch bit, then a 3/16 bit, a 7/32 bit, and finally an F bit, which is the correct size for a 5/16 18 tap. Now I always buy my taps with the matching bit, since I don't keep all those weird sizes in my drill index. With the pilot hole the correct size, I came back with my tap and threaded the saw body. I made sure to clean out the threads as I worked through the 1/4 inch or so material, and I even added a bit of oil to keep things moving smoothly. Once I was through, I backed out the tap, and then I checked the fit with the knob that I planned on using. Back at the drill press, I chucked up an 11/32 brad point bit to drill the clearance hole for the knob. In hindsight, I could have gone with a 3/8 bit to give me a little bit more wiggle room, and I'll probably come back at some point to do that. The thread on the knob didn't really penetrate the plywood enough to grab the bandsaw, so I had to make a little adjustment. I set the fence and a stop lock on the drill press so that the bit lined up with the hole that I had just drilled. Then I swapped out my brad point bit for a 5/8 inch Forstner bit and set my depth of cut to go just through the top layer of plywood. Then I could set the plywood back in place and drill the countersunk holes in just the right location. This left me with plenty of thread to grab the bandsaw, but not so much that it would interfere with the blade. To mount the adapter to the plywood, I'm going to use some No. 6 by 3/4 inch wood screws. I laid the 4 mounting holes along the center lines of the 2.5 inch hole that I had previously drilled, and I pre-drilled each mounting hole with a VIX bit. These self-centering bits are great when adding any hardware. I drilled the first hole and drove in the screw to keep the adapter in place. Then I repeated that for the other 3 screws to make sure nothing moved while I was working. After removing the adapter, I gave the plywood a quick sanding and eased the edges a bit. Now this won't get handled a lot, but enough that I don't want any sharp edges on it. I had some leftover paint from the bandsaw rebuild, so I gave the plywood a few coats. If you'd like to see the videos showing how I rebuilt this saw, I'll add those links below. My thought is that painting the plywood helps it to blend in and maybe it'll look like it actually belongs there. I gave it a light sanding and then added one last coat of paint. Once that paint was dry, I reattached the adapter with the 4 screws. With fasteners this small, I prefer to drive them by hand so they won't strip out the wood. It's time to attach the new dust chute. The knob holds it snugly in place, but it's still easy enough to remove when I change blades. And yeah, I need to give the clearance hole a bit more space. The left side, bottom, and top of the chute are snug to the saw, but that gap on the right side is open into the body of the saw, which could cause a loss of suction when the shop vac is attached. I couldn't find any weather stripping in the shop, but I did find some foam backer rod and I set that in the gap. I trimmed it to length with a razor, and if this works out, I'll find some way to glue it to the dust chute later. Nothing to do now but take it for a spin and see how it works. I hook up the hose for my shop vac, grabbed a piece of poplar and ran it through the saw. While the table seemed fairly clear of dust, the stand did have some sawdust below the bottom wheel. As I thought back to my old bandsaw, with a real dust collector connected, I remembered that even then I had similar results. Maybe bandsaws are just dusty creatures. My shop-vac powered dust control system isn't perfect, but it does seem to get most of the dust created during a cut. And it may work better if it was connected to an actual dust collector. We'll just have to wait and see on that. I do recall on a previous bandsaw that was a little bit newer than this guy, had 2 ports. One under the table like this one, and another one down by the lower wheel. And even though those were connected to a dust collector, I still remember there being dust on the stand and the floor while I was working. So considering that I only have less than $10 and a couple hours invested in this attachment, I think it was worth it, even if it only helps a little. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. Is there something I could have done differently? Smarter, safer, more efficiently? Drop them in the comments below. I'd also love to hear if you've had to adapt some old equipment of your own with dust collection, and did it work, and was it worth the effort? I've started adding some affiliate links in the description below my videos, so if there's anything you need, you can go through those links. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does help fund this channel and keep things going. And if you like this video, maybe give us a thumbs up and share it with friends. And if you haven't already, maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button, little bell, so you get notified each time I put out a new video. As usual, I don't have a clue what's coming up next, but I like to think it's going to be interesting. So until then, have a great day, stay safe, and take care. We'll see you soon.